Hi, this is Tessa, and as I mentioned in the introductory video, this is 20 with Tessa, and I'm going to be doing a series of videos for the Guild of One Name Studies, and also in my capacity as the Guild USA West Regional Representative. And today what we're going to be discussing is tips and suggestions for spreadsheets. And at the outset, I will mention, and I'm sure you're going to hear me mention it when we're dealing with specific spreadsheets, that I am, in my own opinion, a beginner to an intermediate in Excel spreadsheets. I use Excel because I have the Microsoft programs on my PC and it makes sense to me. It's rather intuitive. There are a number of other spreadsheet programs out there. A number of people use Google Spreadsheets or Open Office spreadsheets. Some people work directly with comma-separated value documents, and there's a wide variety of spreadsheets out there. Microsoft Excel is the one I'm most familiar with, so that's what I'm using. At the outset, I would say that spreadsheets are a very useful tool to use with your one name study, because a spreadsheet is simply a flat database as opposed to a relational database, which is more along the lines of Access. And something to keep in mind if you have the Microsoft products is that oftentimes you can take an Excel spreadsheet and put it into Access. You can also copy and paste a number of things that you have in your Excel spreadsheet and put them into other programs, for instance, PowerPoint, Publisher, Word, any of those kinds of things. So personally, I just find it really useful to work with that. However, I will also say that I did not find Excel easy to use at the beginning because I'm not a numbers person, and so I hadn't used any of the math features or any of the accounting features, and in fact I didn't really even consider using Excel until the first trip that I made up to Newfoundland when I was doing some research. And what I realized early on was I wasn't going to be able to get as much information as I wanted to gather in the short amount of time I had to gather it if I didn't come up with a system to basically be doing data entry. And so what I did was I took a look at the format that the record was kept in. And for instance, in the record that I'm talking about, say it was the baptismal records of the church. And there was a date and a given name and a surname and the parents' names and maybe the priest who baptized and, for instance, perhaps the church that the child was baptized in. A lot of times those baptism records also had the birth date of the child. And so what I did was I simply made up a spreadsheet that followed along in the same exact format as the document that I was reading, and literally looking at the information, did data entry. And it was a good system to use, and it was the first time I'd really done a large scale, I think they refer to it as data gathering or data mining for my research records. And what happened was when I started looking into doing a one-place study, because I was interested in finding out all I could about individuals with my surname who lived in a small community up in Newfoundland, and I needed to find out who those people married, if people married in or married out, and what the children's names were after that. And what I found was I just needed to try and collect every instance of Keogh, which is my surname, that I could find while I was there. And then after the trip, I could sit down and go through and try and come up with the links and ask questions. But at the outset, you needed to gather the information. And so that's where I found out that spreadsheets came in really handy. And I'm hoping that when I show you how I use them, if you aren't already using them, you will find them handy as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is you're going to open an Excel spreadsheet, and you can follow along, and my guess would be that the other spreadsheets are pretty similar, although they might not have all the bells and whistles that Excel has. And the first thing that you'll notice when you open an Excel spreadsheet is that this is actually considered a workbook, and that's because it is a combination of 3 worksheets, and they're listed along here: sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3, and then you can always add a sheet and it'll just keep it in that order. And so the first thing you're going to notice, and this is something I always do, is I zoom. You can zoom in or out. I prefer to work with it in a smaller mode, so mine is set at about 80%, but you could make it as large or as small as you want in order to read it. And you're probably already aware of this, but you can easily click through that. So I'm using Excel 2007. And I believe that Excel 2010 is real similar to it. They introduced the ribbon system with Office 2007, and I personally like the ribbon system because it's a way of entering your information or following along in whatever you're working on the basis of some pretty basic areas, and everything is grouped together. So in the first instance, you have your home button, and this is where you would set the font that you want to use and the size. It also gives you the ability, and you can just look along here at the bottom, to make any changes you want in the font, anything in your alignment. It helps you, and this is one area you really need to be aware of in Excel, is that you're entering the information in a general format for the most part, except for when you're working with dates or numbers. And then you need to go ahead, and when you're working in any of those types of columns, you're going to need to pay attention to what kind of date or number information you fill in. It gives you the ability to insert and delete cells, and then this is the thing that's going to prove most interesting to people who work with a one-name study, is after you've entered all your information, you're able to sort and filter or find and select items. And you're probably already familiar with it, but it gives you the ability to insert pictures, to insert shapes, and sometimes that helps you with various things. I think probably the most important things for Excel is the chart. And I'm going to show you what that looks like for genealogy purposes or for one-name study purposes. And that's pretty much how I use my Excel. Another area that's pretty important is the functions. So if you're trying to do any math functions, Excel is really helpful in this. And the thing that I've found with the one-name studies is a lot of times you might get a birth date and a death date, and that includes the year. And so you can come up with an age by doing a subtraction. You might get an age and a death date, and then by doing the math, you can come up with an estimated birth year. So there's a number of ways you can kind of play with it once you have your data there. And so you don't need to know a lot of math functions, but sum and subtraction are really helpful here. Another area that's really useful is to use text to columns, and that's in your data tools and data valuation. And when we get to that point, I'll show you how I use it. The view, I think the most important thing in view is I always freeze the top pane, and that's something you can easily do here. You can freeze a top row, you can freeze panes, you can freeze a column. And the reason that you would do something like that is because as you're working with your worksheet, you might have 5,000 rows of information, and you want to know what those labels or titles were in your spreadsheet, and you don't want to get lost, and so that's pretty helpful. As you become better with Microsoft Excel, you're going to want to start using some of the macros. And these are just things that you do over and over again, and you can record a macro and then the program will actually do it for you. I'm just now learning about macros, so maybe we'll have a video on that and someone can help us figure out how to use them. What I found was the most helpful thing to do, and I wasn't really aware of it until recently, is you have a quick access toolbar. And this is something you really need to give a little bit of thought to. And the things that I have found the most useful, certainly you always want to save your work. And I have that timed to save every once in a while so that I don't even have to think about it. But always save your work before you leave your workbook. This is the most important key, in my opinion. You can always undo anything you've done in Excel, and that's the case in all of the Microsoft products. And what you have to remember, and it took me a while to learn, is don't freak out when you've made a mistake or your Excel spreadsheet does something wonky. Just go ahead and click the undo bar, and you can do it one at a time, or you can go back to the area that you found kind of where you screwed up. and you can undo it. So no worries here, and you just kind of have to relax, which that took me a little bit to get used to just because I was not familiar with what I considered a math program, and it's really not. Think of it as a flat database program and you'll be a lot more comfortable, or at least this liberal arts major was. All right. Something else that I wasn't aware of is that you can use your spreadsheet as you can put it in a format rather than a spreadsheet format, and I'll need to show you when I actually have some data entered. But this was new to me, and it is really helpful if you're doing more of an extended filter or sorting, or if you're looking for particular types of information. The next item is just the properties of your workbook. I have copy and transpose up here, as well as cut and paste, and then I have a final one which is delete sheet rows. Now, if you haven't worked at all with Excel, or you haven't spent any time making changes to your quick access toolbar, you're going to be wondering, you know, I have save and I have undo, but I don't have anything else up here. Well, the way that you find it is with the Office button, and then you come down to Excel options. And once you open that, basically what this is doing is you can set certain things so they'll always show up. And in this instance, I have it set up so that it's always with Comic Sans and a font size. You can set it up so that you can put information in here for error checking, or what you want to have in error rule checking. I don't really use this that much because I don't use too many formulas. Customize is the one that we want to go to. And this is very similar to Word and to PowerPoint. And if you haven't done it in your other programs, I would definitely suggest you do it because I find this incredibly helpful. So when you go to Customize, it has popular commands in here. And the first thing I did was I asked it for all commands. So you can scroll through and ask it to add to your quick access toolbar anything you want. And as I mentioned before, save, undo, and redo are already in your quick access toolbar. And then I've added separators between kind of categories of things I want to do. So when I copy and transpose, that's different than cutting and pasting, and that's also different than deleting sheet rows. So I put separators in between them, and that's the first tab or button that you see up here. So there's any wide variety of things, and I'm just going to kind of scroll through quickly. If you do a lot of work with charts and you want it in your quick access toolbar, it's right there. If you are doing a lot of comparing and merging your workbooks, that might be something you want to look into. If you do a lot of things with your data, this might be an area you want to look at, that you might want to put on 2 or 3 quick access buttons in there. The one thing I would tell you is don't go overboard on your quick access toolbar, because if your quick access toolbar runs across the entire length of your top bar here, you basically are recreating your ribbon. Now, I find it easy to go to the ribbon and say, everything in page layout is there, everything in formula is in one section, everything in data is in one section. So my idea here, or my suggestion to you, would be don't be too quick about loading up your quick access toolbar. But I would definitely suggest that you find and add form, properties, copy and transpose, cut and paste, and delete sheet rows, because as we work through things in the Excel spreadsheets that I'm going to be showing you, I will be going up and using those buttons, and you could easily follow along with that. Now, some people might want to put their quick access toolbar below the ribbon. I prefer to have mine at the top, but this is also just a personal preference, and you can do that. So this is something I wasn't really familiar with before, and I'll also show you here that if you came to save, I've asked it to save every 5 minutes for me. So you could set it at a shorter time or a longer time. It just depends on what your preferences are. But I would definitely suggest take a look at all your options and use whichever ones work for you. So We have that together, and we have a blank worksheet. And so this was just to show you how all of this looks. What the next thing that I want to do is I want to take a look at particular worksheets that I had open. And the way that you do that is you go to View, and then this is the window down along here, and we're going to switch windows. So right now book 2 is open, which has nothing in it, and I have a number of workbooks that I have open and available to look at. So what we're going to do today, just as a short little intro with this, is we're going to take a look at the Keogh surname date distribution. And you'll notice right away that we have a really nice chart, and basically all I did was once I entered the data, and I entered the data here through columns which are done with the alphabet and the rows which are done with numbers, I entered the data here, and then I just asked it to make a chart. And that's a pretty easy thing to do. If you select all of your data and you hit F11, it will make a chart for you, and then you can go in and change the chart however you want. Maybe you want a black background, maybe you want a white background, maybe you want it to be colorful, maybe you want it to be simply in black and white, what have you. You can really play a lot with your chart. You can increase the size, decrease the size. I would definitely encourage you to enter some information in an Excel spreadsheet and then play around with the charting capabilities. This is a great thing to show on your guild profile. It's also a really nice thing to maybe have on your blog if you want to encourage other Keoghs to get a hold of you. You know, it's a quick and easy visual showing of the Keogh surnames in this instance in the USA censuses. So how did I get this information? Well, what I did was I typed in surname, I typed in the years for the USA censuses, and I typed in my primary surname, which is Keogh, K-E-O-U-G-H, as well as the variants that I've decided to include in my study. And then what I did was I went to 2 places. I went to Ancestry.com, and this is something that I don't think is behind the member wall. What they'll do is they'll let you look at information, but they will not let you look at the particular census information unless you have a subscription. But Ancestry.com is one of those. And you can say that you want to look at census and voter lists. You can narrow it by categories, but you can just put in your surname and you can look for that information. So if I wanted to narrow it by a category, I could say, I want all the U.S. federal census collection, and then I could do the search. So that's how you do it in Ancestry. In Family Search, what you're going to do is you're going to put your surname in, and we have asked for USA. And so it's giving me all of the information. And you can also say that you want to take a look at the collection and you want to see filters. And so I just looked at the collections, I clicked on it, and I have an opportunity to look at birth, marriage, and death information, census lists, migration and naturalization, military, and probate. So I'm going to ask it for the census lists. And what you need to do here is also go through and show your filters again. Now it's not that clear when you're first looking at their site, so go ahead and kind of play around on any of these websites. You can't break any of them. So just look through, and what you see is this opens up, any of these arrows will open up more information. Now, Family Search as well as Ancestry, and I would say Google, have all gone to this very clean white background with kind of a grayish black fonts. And as you can see here, I have it at 80%, and so you might be looking at this and saying that it needs to be bigger. And one of the easy things you can do here is just click anywhere, hit Control plus, make it as large as you want. Control minus would make it smaller again. So there's a number of ways of making your screen larger or smaller, zooming in or zooming out. Use whatever works best for you. But the point I was going to make here is all of the censuses are listed, and they're all done in alphabetical order. So for instance, in the National Census for Argentina in 1895, there are 4 Keoghs. This is something I need to check out. We also have the Canadian censuses, 1851 through, it looks like, 1916. And they list a number of things. I would say at the outset that 1916 must not be complete because all of the other censuses have much larger numbers. And I believe, in fact, that Canada Lower and Canada Upper are also separated out. As you can see here, we have the England and Wales censuses from 1841 through 1911. And you'll see it's a little hard to read here, but in 1911 there are 1,384 kios. The states censuses are listed because it's all in alphabetical order, and what we're going to want to do is scroll to the bottom, and then we get the US Census. And what you'll find is you have the censuses, and you can look at any of them from 1800 forward, and it goes up through 1940 because, as you know, the volunteers did such a good job. We can all pat ourselves on the back. We transcribed or indexed the 1940 US Census, and that was done in record time. So I hope you're all sticking with it and doing some more indexing through Family Search. In any event, you could take these numbers, you could look at them here and just add them to the spreadsheet that we talked about. Then you could also look up the information if you wanted to, because in the census, for instance, in this 1940 census, it's listing a person's information. But for our purposes, I took this information and put it in my spreadsheet. So I came here and looked at the instances of the KEO name, put the information in. I made a note that I entered all of this from familysearch.org, and I also made a note that, as you can see here, there's no data entry for 1890, and that's because the 1890 census was destroyed by fire. So there's no numbers except for veterans and their widows. So I really didn't want to kind of skew my data, so I went ahead and left that out. So this is the KEO USA census with a chart, and then you could also take this chart, and if you just click on it, you can copy and paste it and stick it in your profile. So that's one introduction into some tips and suggestions with using Excel, and in the next video I'm going to give you some tips and suggestions in actually gathering your data, copying, pasting it, and tidying it up. But I wanted to show you that really quickly you could gather data, put it into chart format with nothing more difficult than just hitting the F11 button, and have your information show in a real visual way. And I've done this for the USA censuses, for the Canadian censuses, and for the UK censuses. I've also done it for the Irish census, but there's only two to compare, so it doesn't provide you as much of a flavor for the information as the censuses that are over a longer period of time. So I hope you take this opportunity, whatever program you're using for your spreadsheet, to do a little bit of summary work so that if you haven't done it yet, you have a sense of two things: how many people with your surname there are in the various censuses in both a numerical format as well as a visual format, and it also kind of gives you a sense of how much work you have ahead of you. But I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by this, because all this is doing is telling you that you have a specific amount of information that you're going to be gathering over time. A one-name study is not something that you complete in a month or a year, and maybe not even in 10 years. And it's also something that you can work on, leave alone for a while, come back to. You know, nobody is saying to make it a chore. It's supposed to be something that's interesting, that's educational, that's informative, and is basically taking your genealogy up a level or up a notch to the next step. So I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you give it a try. Two things. I hope, if you haven't done so already, you update your quick access toolbar, and I also hope that you play around a little bit with charting with your spreadsheet programs. So I hope to see you next time, and best wishes with your study.